PhD leaders from around the world to talk about the moral side and the responsive side. Even if we look at Hurricane Katrina, we don't truly understand the impact. I mean, there are literally lands that are being lost right now. This gentleman mentioned acidification. There are fisheries around the world right now where not only coral is being lost, but their shrimp populations are being lost. And acidification is very real. It's happening at a very fast rate. If you haven't seen a film that I would suggest outside, I know a lot of people know about The Inconvenient Truth and an Inconvenient Sequel, but Race to Extinction is a great film to be able to watch because it shows how climate change will deplete about almost 50% of our ocean population over the next several years. And these are very serious issues. So when I came back, I understood fundamentally that the President Obama at the time decided that they would sign the Paris Accord and that the United States, which the United States and China are the largest emitters of carbon emitters in the world globally. I think we consume 50% of the world's waste, but we're less than a tenth of the world's population. This is a huge issue. So what I think is very important is for us to be able to know and understand who is in some of these positions. First and foremost, the Department of Energy is headed by Rick Perry. Now, we all know about Rick Perry. Don't have to go too far into Mr. Perry, but what I will tell you about Rick Perry was that when he was running for president, he said that the first agency he would get rid of is the one that he now is over. They asked Rick Perry at a debate, if you were to cut government, what would be the first department you cut? And Rick Perry said, without blinking, I would cut the Department of Energy. And now he heads up that department. Scott Pruitt is over the EPA. When he was in Oklahoma, he had 56 open lawsuits against the EPA. And Scott Pruitt currently, even as the EPA director, even being being the administrator over the EPA, he has 13 current lawsuits, even though he sits at the helm of that seat. And not only that, but they have literally taken almost every reference to climate change off of the EPA's website. And one of the first things that Scott Pruitt did in his first 100 days on the job was cut in half almost every single one of the scientists that worked within the EPA. So you have folks that were there for 20 and 30 years. One of them is my friend who was over the Environmental Justice and Rural Protections Division of the EPA, and he was there for 26 years. But when the new federal budget came out, about half of his budget was cut, and he was still tasked to take care of folks in rural communities and to take care of folks that were in communities that were being underserved. And that's what I mean by saying not to get distracted by the tweets. Look, I get it. You know, Charlottesville is horrible. We have to fix that. But being more distracted by the rhetoric he's saying than the policies that are changing all around, and that's a very important issue. I'm not downplaying it at all. What I'm trying to say is that even though those things are happening, there are 1,000 more things that are happening right under our nose, including the appointment of federal judges that he has right now. And I'm going to go into a couple of them, but federal judges that will be there for at least 10 years after Trump is gone. One of them is the former attorney for Deepwater Horizon. How many of you all know about Deepwater Horizon? Well, the former attorney for that is now one of the appointed judges that Trump has, appointed to be able to work within the federal government to support Trump's deregulation efforts. So we have folks that literally worked on behalf of protecting big oil that are now sitting at the helm of these spaces when we're trying to fight so vigorously on the outside. The Senate cut the Stream Protection Act. There are virtually no more impact on these big companies that are coming in and polluting our waters. And that has to stop, and it's wrong. So I'm going to go into a couple more people, and then I'll finish up on one section, and then I'll stop so that we can take some questions. The next name I wanted to give you all was Mr. Zinke, who is the Department of Interior Secretary, Ryan Zinke. He was, and I'm not sure how many of you all know the actual role of the Department of Interior, but it's to protect our public lands. And some of the things that we're seeing right now, the rollbacks that we're seeing, are not just about the deregulation side, but it's so much focused on the types of things that are happening to protect lands outside of just urban areas, but rural areas as well. The reason why his position is so important and why I'm so upset about it is because he actually passed, and he went on record by saying that reducing the environmental impacts of public lands is un-American. That's literally what he said. He wants to totally remove the environmental impacts portion of the Department of Interior. Now I want you guys to understand something, and I'm not here with this big prepared speech and, you know, trying to charge up the crowd. These are very serious times. I have 3 children. I took my sons to NASA Ames Research Center in California, and they showed my son, I just turned 38 a couple of weeks ago, and they showed my 12-year-old a map. They said, well, your dad is 38, and I was 37 at the time. They said, your dad is 37. Let me show you how the planet is going to look when you turn your dad's age. And that map was scary. It showed how much land we lost. It showed how high the sea levels had risen. It's nothing like seeing something. I mean, we all know the statistics. We got the information from this powerful presentation. But when you put into perspective your children and your grandchildren, I know Shelly Gates in the back, Shelly, wave at me. I know Shelly brought her daughter with us that I think she's a sophomore at South Forsyth High School. Those are the things that should bother you more than anything, your children and your grandchildren. What kind of planet are we raising our kids in? I mean, there's so many issues. You mentioned the military. When you think of the rhetoric coming out of the White House right now, all of our generals agree, not just because of the glaciers melting, but because the soldiers that are in the Middle East that have to be able to deal with combat-related issues that are in 125 and 140 degree weather. I want you to think about that. My father was a United States Army Ranger, Special Forces, and he had to go into some areas like Somalia that were twice the type of weather that we're seeing right now. It puts our soldiers at risk. Another friend that did war games with the United States Army, and they said that the Third World War would happen over 2 things. 1, a lack of food, and 2, a lack of water. They said once areas began to see their water sources depleted, it would cause regional conflicts. It's essential for us to have clean air and clean water and be able to have access to some type of food to be able to survive as human beings. So here's the first thing that I want to share with you all. Number 1, don't try and be a scientist if you're not a scientist. Just own the issue that's important to you. It's real simple. Our job is not to get out, whether you might be in the room and you might be a Republican, you might be an independent, but I believe the majority of folks in this room are Democrats or progressives. And I want you to know, take one issue, whether it's understanding politically what's going on under the Gold Dome or understanding fundamentally what's going on with how the climate is affecting us. I know I deal with pollen every year. And I want you to know the way our climate is affects everything from the crops we grow. How many of you all remember the drought we had a couple of years ago in Georgia?
Last year. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean last year, but we had the one that we had when we didn't get. When was the one when we didn't get rain for like 3 months?
3 years.
7 months. There you go. See, you guys know you're shaking your head at me now. But that's that's the kind of thing we're talking about. So now we've got to change the paradigm, and we've got to start working to prepare our farmers and our folks that live in rural areas to be able to prepare for things like that. That's why it's so important. I attended a summit in Alabama with farmers. Over 300 farmers came out that were beginning to convert their land from cattle to solar panels. These are opportunities that we've got to educate our communities on. They're now building solar farms in North Carolina and Arkansas. We've got to start looking at innovation. I was in West Virginia a couple of months ago, and I told somebody, I said, look, you know, immigrants aren't taking your jobs. Automation is. Technology and innovation is changing. So now, for those of us who have children or grandchildren that are in school, we've got to start talking to them about the jobs of the future. And the jobs of the future, no matter how you look at it, it's a renewable future. Look, Donald Trump not only pulled us out of the Paris Accords, but what that literally did was it destroyed the opportunity for manufacturing in the Midwest. We could have become the world's #1 manufacturer of wind panels. Now imagine if you retrain the coal miners. Now there are only 50,000 coal miners in the United States, so all this rhetoric about bringing these coal jobs back is not going to happen. But what if we offered a program to allow folks that work in certain industries that are becoming obsolete to get retrained with free community college to be able to create and install solar panels? You don't need a high school degree or a college degree to be able to install such. It's training. And we've got to get back to working with communities that are not only impoverished, but with people that just want a job. If you really want to know a lot about why, and I don't want to get off track about with climate, but if you want to know why the opioid crisis is hitting so hard in some of these rural areas, it's because people don't have access to jobs. And when depression and anxiety and not being able to put food on the table or keep the lights on in the house, people turn to means that are horrible. And as it relates to climate, I want us to begin to get educated. So the first thing I told you to do, if you're not a scientist, don't be a scientist. Pick an issue and stand on that issue and work and speak and communicate with the members of your community. Number two, when folks like Josh McCone, who's in the back, are running for office, make sure you hold them accountable. It's not enough to elect Democrats. If we elect Democrats that vote against democratic principles, what are we doing? Yeah. We need to know exactly what those other 367 mayors did. And if you're running for state house or you're running for school board, there is one of the largest statewide, one of the largest district-wide school sustainability programs in the city of Atlanta. Now, how many of you have kids? Raise your hand if you have children. Now, if you have children or grandchildren and you've had lunch with them, I want you to look at that lunch and I want you to ask if you would eat that lunch. Now, why am I saying that? Because we've got to get back to allowing kids to understand where tomatoes and potatoes come from. I mean, that's all a part of climate and environmental sciences. We've got to start working with our local schools so that science can be back in our schools. If they're taking scientists out of the EPA, what do you think they're doing as it relates to science in our classrooms? So we've got to get back to the point of re-educating folks. So I expect every single candidate that you meet, every person, we want to ask them, what are you going to do? Because the only way for us to stay on track with the Paris Climate Accords is to make sure that we're electing people that are going to take bold stands. In the city of Atlanta right now, by the year 2035, they want their entire government fleet to be electric vehicles. Now, every city can't do that. I get it. Every city can't make that big effort, but cities can begin to do small things that will lead to long-term benefits. And the climate is changing at an enormous rate. And when you look at what's happening right now, it's really incumbent upon the people to be educated to make sure that when we go out to vote and we go out to do different things, it makes sense to all of us. The third thing that I want you to do is to make sure that when you leave this room, don't only shake our hands, but really see what information is out there. Forget resources. The one thing that I know is that I didn't go to school for environmental sciences. I didn't go to school to be a climatologist. I didn't go to school to be a meteorologist or any other ologist. I didn't. But when I found out how the issue was going to affect my family and my community and how it was going to impact our communities, when I learned about how increased climate affects senior citizens with upper respiratory illnesses, when I went to the CDC and learned how the climate impact is affecting women's reproductive systems because of some of the things that are happening to the water we drink and how it impacts our bodies. Understand that you guys have filled up this room and it's great, and I'm so happy that this standing room right now, but it's not enough if we don't go out and multiply the amount of people that is going to go out and vote and understand why the climate is so important. The last thing that I'm going to share with you, and my iPad just shut off. I got one more thing for you. See, technology, right? Oh, I wanted to go over these judges really quickly. So the first nominee Trump made was Damian Schiff. He was a lawyer with the Political Legal Foundation, which has 17 active suits against the federal government. Now, let me tell you why this is important. Neil Gorsuch, he was appointed to the Supreme Court. It's a lifetime appointment. These individuals that are getting these appointments by Mr. Trump right now, they're going to be in for a long time. They have active and open lawsuits. Now, I don't know how many of you were watching the Dakota Access Pipeline that was going on when folks were fighting to make sure that their land was protected. But imagine if the lawyers that were representing those corporations that were trying to build that pipeline were now appointed and were the judges or become the judges that are going to now have to oversee the cases that folks were using their First Amendment right to stand up against. That's what's going on right now. So not only do we have folks that are in the Senate removing the Stream Protection Act, not only do we have folks that are being appointed like Mr. Pruitt and Rex Tillerson, who works he's our Secretary of State, as you know, but he worked for ExxonMobil. We've got folks that are not only working against us, but now we can't even go to the courts to legally put up a fight for it. So there are only two options, and I'll take my seat. Number one, we get the folks out that are in there that are not going to do right, and we vote new people in. And number two, we educate ourselves enough to make sure that going forth, our children and our grandchildren and our communities are not only equipped and not only get the knowledge and the information they need, but they become active. Let's stop voting just in and out of an election season. Let's work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make sure we do as much as we can to protect our air and our water. It's the only planet we have. And I can tell you fundamentally, if we don't do something now, the folks that are there will do different. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to the show.